greatest threat to our nation is this false sense of diversity. That is the greatest fallacy of the past century.
The struggle of masculinity and the struggle of men is going to take place inside you. That in order to be your best self, you need to have this squared away. So one of my favorite things about interviewing people, and in this case, the makers of the movie Cuck, thank you so much for watching and tuning in, is when your mind changes about something. When you walk into it thinking one thing and you walk out of this amazing conversation, however it is, in this case, it was over Zoom, in the pandemic. And man, that human-to-human interaction, that discussion changes your mind. And that's what happened to me in this interview. Enter in Joe Varkle, the writer of Cuck, and Rob Lambert, the writer and the director of Cuck, in this conversation that we have about the movie, which is, as categorized by many, a political thriller. But really, it's a story about a young man who has a lot of problems. Gets very involved in some internet causes, I guess you could say, gets very politicized. But there's a backstory to all of that that gives this character an interesting dimension. But what's interesting is this character actually is huge in my industry of men's development, also in the dating and seduction industry. That a guy like this either invested a ton into the dating, seduction, men's development industry and got zero results and got really angry, or he didn't have the money to do that and got really angry about his situation with dating, women, sex, his place in the world, his feeling of being a part of something. And this is a massively common thing amongst young men. Why we don't feel a part of, why we feel out of place, why we feel angry, why we get pissed off, why we want other people to feel our pain, and why we will go to extreme lengths just to be heard, to sabotage ourselves, our families, our country, or whatever, just because we feel out of place. That is my world. I see that client every day. It's when I see a movie being made about that. It's very important. But what's so cool about this interview is that we go far beyond that. In fact, my mind changes on that quite a bit from watching, editing, and producing the promotional material for this interview. A lot changed in how I think about this stuff. So, but here's the really good stuff. If you want to watch the movie Cuck, you totally should. If you haven't, it will help a lot if you watch this interview. If you watch the movie before this interview, and you can find all the links to watch that down below. I watched it off Amazon, but I know it's playing at a bunch of places. Also, if you want to follow their social media, if you want to follow Rob, Rimrock Productions, if you want to find Joe or any of those things, I leave the contact information for that all down below, and you totally should follow them. Send them a shout out. Tell them you saw the interview, tell them you liked the movie, tell them you didn't like the movie, all that sort of stuff. Tell them you liked the movie. If you didn't like it, just keep it to yourself. And of course, leave a comment, like it, dislike it, whatever. Subscribe to my channel if you want to see more stuff like this and build that sort of discussion. Guys, I don't care about the number of views who watches it. I care about you and what you get from it. So leave a comment, message me, email me, all that sort of stuff. That feedback is really, really listened to, and I interact with everybody. Okay, let's get started.
Are you ready to take the red pill? Or are you just another cuck?
Boom. Man, nothing makes me happier than this, because from the moment I saw the promotions, which I don't know how I saw them, like, I don't know if you guys got Facebook ads or whatever. I saw this movie Cuck, which I've been called so many freaking times. I'm like, this is awesome. And then I just saw this. So I didn't see the movie, and we'll tell later. But I mean, this was like 2 years, or I don't know when it was, like a year and a half ago. Yeah. And I'm like, this is what I'm talking about. Like, the red pill is so crazy. The men's movement is so crazy, and this is what I work in. I'm like, I'm just gonna start sharing this movie, and it would piss people off. Like I remember there was this one ad you guys had of a bunch of faces of all the school shooters, and it was like, these are cucks or something like that, and people were like, fuck you, Steve, for posting. I'm like, dude, it's a movie. Anyway, this is the writer and director. So Rob, you directed it. Yep. And Varkle like sparkle. Man, was that easy to grow up with? So you wrote it, and man, there's so much I'd want to talk to you guys about that, because it's so freaking spot on. Why'd you do this? Of all the movies you could write and build treatments out of, or whatever you do in that process, write scripts of, what inspired you? Because it's so modern and it's so accurate.
Yeah, I think I could take this. Initially, it really came from a simple place for I think us, where we were we had sold a couple shows, and I was interviewing people to be the showrunner on a couple things that I had written, and Joe had a hand in writing. And the feedback that I always got when it would come back to, hey, I think I can handle this, was, well, you've never done a feature. So, you haven't done a feature, and you kind of got to wait your turn. So the projects that I'm talking about kind of fell apart. And in the meantime, I'd been trying to figure out, what kind of independent film was I going to do. And, I've always been drawn to, extreme fringe character study films and 70s movies, early Michael Mann, Thief, Buffalo 66, like these kind of very pared down, like really gritty character study films. So it really started from there, because I felt like that was an easier place for me as a filmmaker to sink all my interest into a film, rather than doing a like a cabin in the woods horror film, or
That's what everybody
mumblecore.
wants to do, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
the
which is
gritty
probably
film.
maybe the smarter way to go, actually. But it just turned out that that was sort of the genre that I'm most interested in, and being just a social like a social nerd, and like just being into those films really drove me to figuring out what's the extreme fringe character of today. And
Man,
around that, yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead. There's something I want to
Yeah.
ask, but please finish.
Yeah, so around that same time, while we were fishing for what that film was going to be, I got really into these, I guess you call them fight videos. It was around like 2016, before the election. I call them political fight rally videos that were like in Berkeley. You'd see like kind of like MAGA guys with red hats and like swords, and you'd see Antifa guys with black masks and bike locks, and you'd see them like bash it out on the streets, or fighting on the beaches of Huntington Beach. And it just was like a phenomenon. And I got like really wrapped into watching these and figuring like, how are all these people like connecting and knowing how to meet up? And we started tracing back like some of the people that we had seen in these groups, and it all kind of linked back to the chans, the 4chan, Reddit, 8chan, and a lot of these. And so the genesis for the idea of this kind of a frontline, I guess, internet soldier, if you want to call it that, sort of started from those early videos, and my own personal connection to a lone wolf shooter when I was a kid. And so it was sort of like, so when I was growing up, I actually went to school with Wayne Lowe, who was one of the first school shooters, probably 9 years before Columbine even. I moved to Billings, Montana, and would ride the bus with this high school kid named Wayne Lowe, Taiwanese American kid, and he got shipped off to boarding school. And while he was out there, he committed one of the first lone wolf shootings. So that whole event, and knowing this guy before he took that plunge off the deep end, it all sort of crystallized for me as a character, and sort of a kind of a film idea, something I'd always been interested in and following. And this was, he became infamous from that. And it's been interesting too, since the film came out. He had heard I was talking about him, and so he reached out to me from prison, and I've gotten to know Wayne Lowe pretty well, actually, at this point.
Did you know him before?
Yeah.
Like, so personally?
Well, he was a bit older than me. We rode the bus every day, and I got to watch firsthand him taking some kind of bullying, and seeing some of that happen firsthand. And I was just a younger kid, and I wasn't part of the bullying. I was maybe 5th grade or something, and he was maybe a 9th or 10th grader. But yeah, so all these years later, when we talk about it, he can isolate it down. Like today, you talk to him, and you can't kind of meet or talk to a calmer, more reasonable person. And
Mhm.
and what I kind of distilled that down to is that time period between like 16 and, I want to call it 25 or something, when young men's minds are really pretty out there. I mean, I think we've all experienced like that kind of screw loose during that time, and that's really where our character falls into line. So it was for me, it was a number of those factors, and I'll let Joe answer his reason for wanting to write about this character. But yeah, it was probably it's like a handful of factors for me that circled and landed on this. None of which were political, by the way, actually, initially.
Really? Great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Lawyers are just off to the screen, that side there. But we really wanted to do this fly on the wall character study. I mean, Rob and I both love those kinds of movies. And, at the time, shootings, were becoming this kind of horrifying regularity. There was sort of just absolute just barrage of them coming out everywhere. And we would be looking at some of the the ideology of who is this character, where did he come from, why is he here, and a lot of these angry young men, they have really similar backgrounds. And the question is, without taking a side one way or the other about who this person is, without either endorsing his beliefs or even fully condemning his beliefs, putting the audience in a really kind of uncomfortable space where you're occupying the same space as this person as he's going through a sort of transformation was something we really wanted to do before we were even nailed down and understanding anything about the groups or understanding, the political side of it or the social side of it, because there's just so many different facets of it. It's a very multifaceted sort of die of all these, different groups that are part of maybe a larger whole, and the whole really is the internet. So once we sort of signed off on the idea that the internet was the tying, the connecting rod that linked all these people together, we wanted to make that a really critical space in the film.
If you ever, I mean, there's so much that you get right, in my opinion, about this. I mean, have you ever gone through those experiences yourself, or have you had like really known somebody? And I know Rob was talking about Wayne Lowe, but like, have you really known somebody like a Ronnie? That's the main character in the film.
Absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of people, first of all, young men almost, unilaterally go through periods of frustration. I think it's very common. I think with a lot of the factors right now, male frustrations are actually very common. Whether they're tied to a lot of these other things is really a matter of exposure and sort of, personal choice of, do I indulge, in this sort of side of the internet or that side of the internet? But I think a lot of young men definitely feel that. And when I was growing up, I knew people like that. I mean, I've been frustrated, Rob's been frustrated. I don't think there's been a, guy out there who hasn't experienced some things in that sense of feeling isolated or not being heard or whatever. And all the experiences are unique to, various individuals. But I think that, yes, there's absolutely a common thread there. And I knew people that, in the recession, I knew people that were, in their late 20s and they were struggling, romantically. They were, living with their parents. They were, getting kicked around from one dead-end job to another dead-end job. This is something that I think was also, it's always been an issue, but I think especially in that decade, we've seen even more and more of it because some of the paths that a lot of people find to success or to self-acceptance are just completely cut off.
And just to put context, how old are you guys?
I'm 35, Rob.
I'm a floating age. I'm about 40.
Okay. Yeah, I'm about 42. But it's interesting with all of this because like we see you guys are not pointing out anything political or a lot of the stuff which the movie uses as a catalyst for this. And we've never talked about this, but I 100% agree with this. I forget when it was in 2011 or 12, I'd be speaking at these conferences. And one that we've talked about that's like massively red pill and like really embodying a lot of the stuff that you see in your film. We would talk about feminism, and my thing was always like, man, this is like hysteria. These people, men get it too. It's just they're talking about something different. We're talking about, and feminism in terms of a political cause of like getting rights inequality, and that's a big definition. Those are good things. I'm not against that in any sort of way. Like, it needed to happen, but then people latched onto it as a tool for, like, man, I need to be empowered. I feel unhappy, and their reason for empowerment was right, but they got so wrapped into a cause that just set off a flag to me that when somebody's that into a cause, that's obsessed with it, that they're usually bringing in their own baggage into it. And these guys, and we would talk about this, and then they start doing it. And I always go, I'm like, am I doing this? You know, like, I'm always trying to check myself because it's so cunning. But that's interesting. So never was this a political thing for you guys. It was just this psychological phenomenon that I think you're saying young men characteristically go through in every kind of generation. But in this generation, we have more going on. Am I getting that right?
Yeah. Well, I think, everything today feels like it touches politics in some way, and I think with this character, when we were looking for this extreme fringe character that we wanted to really focus on and explore, pull back the curtain, the kind of the most extreme fringe person today was this type of character. So it sort of went hand in hand. It wasn't a, we laugh because a lot of things we see online are about how we are propagandists and we made a political film, and really the truth behind that is the character study and the search for the right character came before anything else. And once we kind of found that character, we dove all the way in, though. It's not like we shied away. I think if you're going to decide to do a character like this, you can't go halfway, because then in some ways you're kind of giving maybe the wrong impression or a thumbs up about some of the things that they're involved in. And so I think I think you can't have one without the other in terms of our character in this film. But yeah, as it turns out, I'm actually, the things I see online about me are pretty funny, because I'm actually not that politically motivated. Just naturally, I have my opinions, but I'm not a left-leaning Antifa bandana wearing guy, as maybe people would like to believe. But I have my opinions like everybody, but I think people would be kind of shocked to know that maybe that isn't the driving force behind the film or the filmmaking.
Yeah. No, well, it is interesting because I don't see it as a political issue. I see it as a phenomenon that's happening that turns into like a mental health issue that's for everybody. I work with men, so with men it comes out in these ways, but women, same thing. I mean, we just live in this crazy society. So one thing that, man, there's so much I want to talk to you about the making of the movie, because I saw the promotion, right? And I'm like, it's crazy. This dude with a bat and he's hitting the yard and he's all fat and out of shape. And dude, I've seen pictures of your actor, Ronnie, and the dude doesn't normally look like that. This guy, I want to meet this guy because he did such a good job. I think the dude's a fucking psycho. But
you have to be a little crazy to go that forward. Yeah.
He did such a good job. But I'm seeing this guy do this, and I'm like, this is great. But then I see the movie, and it's really well done, and it's well done on multiple levels. So, I'm just a fan. I like playing with cameras and stuff like that. Yeah, the coloring, the cinematography, the pacing.
Cool.
I was like, this is good. And then when we get into the writing and the character development, that's what's really amazing. This phenomenon of this male has been around maybe since 2012. So I had some crazy stuff happen in 2012 where I was like, man, like, this is fucked. I got fucked by the courts, there's this whole men's rights thing. And I was around, and I was like working with men, and had my hopefully my wits around me about that already. But I just saw that all these guys were really weak. They were blaming. They never did anything with their lives. They were visibly like lost people, and I got away from it almost immediately. But then I saw this surgeon of guys, this resurgence or surgence or whatever of guys that were really commanding and strong, but the same voicing. And this has not been around for a long time. So when you look at these groups, like whatever that you saw them through Reddit or 4chan, how did you get the anthem? Because this is right. I mean, and it's right for Ronnie's case, who's a kid who grows up in Van Nuys. Because I know kids in California that, and man, I'm generalizing, a kid in Texas who grows up pissed off at feminism or the government, and then Trump gets elected and it sets that on fire. Not that Trump meant any of this. I don't think that was Trump's intention. I think it's a phenomenon that kicked it off. But a kid in Texas or a kid in the South is much different than a kid in California. And the element of frustration and racism is so much different, because it's almost like Santa Claus isn't real. The white man has been more oppressed than every man ever. Or like this kind of the megaphone that they've heard, and they're like, holy shit. Whereas a kid in the South may have heard that, and been able to grow up with that. And there's more elements in that, but you guys got this. How did you get this? How did you study it? Did you talk to some of these guys? Like, what happened there?
But we went extensively on a lot of forums. We went all over, 4chan, 8chan, however many powers of Chan there are now. And we went on Red Pill forums, and we looked at a lot of different variations of it. And, in reality, there's a lot of people that are posting on this. There are people at all different levels of, from, somebody just making a YouTube channel because they had all day, to somebody who's very polished and has like an entire, sort of cadre of these videos. And, some of them are actually intelligent and some of them really funny. And the thing is, they're all sort of looking at different facets of frustration. It's as if there's a large rock that's blocking the horizon. People are looking at it from different examples. What is this? Why are we frustrated? Why is it, is it doing this? So we wanted it to be real. We also, really grounded it heavily in the setting of the Valley. And I think Rob can talk about that a little bit more as we get into sort of the filmmaking process. But just the idea that if you are sheltered, if you're stuck in an area where there aren't a lot of people that express the same kind of frustrations you do, you glom on to people that do, whether that's online or in the case of, Larry the mechanic, you find somebody who, is an echo chamber, somebody you can bounce your ideas off and they'll come back to you in a safe environment. And a lot of it's about trust. A lot of it is about being vulnerable in a way that you're not going to get, hit with a stick if you say something. And the issue with a lot of these communities is just, when you get enough people who are opening up about the same thing, the only danger is it creates the echo chamber, and then people, start thinking there's no other way out.
But there's more than that, and I don't want to give away the film, but this comes to the writing, and there's a lot that I could talk about this stuff, and if I rewatched it, I could probably geek out. And you might even be like, Steve, you looked into this way too much. But even so I don't want to give away too much, but there's some Middle Eastern store owners, very common in LA. I was actually explaining this to my son with, not necessarily in context of your film, but a lot of the racism that came out of California or Southern California, like post Rodney King, there was a lot of tension between Koreans and the African-American community, and that all had to do with the shooting and so on. And now there's just so much diversity in LA and not people talking that you see this sort of thing. But the theme of the movie is Cuck and what that means, and it ties into that. Well, he ultimately, finds some employment through these guys. And it's that weird suppression of judgment of these disgusting. The film starts out with seeing some Middle Eastern people in a laundromat and the judgment and the hate towards it. But wait a minute, I'm this oppressed person that has to seek a job for them because the world, the society of, Uber or whatever, delivery system, these things, don't take me, but they'll take this Asian guy, they'll take this other person. Oh, but because my bumper sticker has a pro-life thing, my beliefs, and not seeing I think the overall picture of maybe there's a problem. And if we took this out of the context, this is actually what I'm enjoying about this conversation. So we took this out of the context of something right-leaning and we put it in the context of a political idea or system that just has oppression that I don't know the name of, but it's out there and people experience it, I think we'd see people reacting in these same ways. And I think that so much of that film, where it gets it, that anger of like, I don't like these people. I can clearly see the truth of why I don't like them.
Yeah.
Yet I have to work with them. Those subtleties, I think, are part of the brilliance of the writing and structure of the film.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think for the character, if you want to peel the onion back and really look at why Ronnie's really mad and why he's so frustrated, it actually has really very little to do with the outsiders or the extraneous factors that actually he puts his focus into. So if you really want to look back at, I can even talk about the valley in Southern California and the way that you're describing some of the things you see. My grandmother was a social worker in Pacoima in the valley for 40, 50 years. And so I've gotten to know and hear a lot about just the change of the valley. My family, a lot of them grew up in the valley, in the San Fernando Valley, for people that don't know which valley we're talking about. But the idea that at the end of World War II, Van Nuys and the surrounding areas were, they were safe. They were kind of like suburban safe havens for vets coming back. So it was like this shiny new Tim Burton-y kind of world where people would, come and set up their families and have the nuclear family and all that. And then slowly over time, as you see in different cities, the whole phenomenon of white flight and people coming to a certain area and then everyone wanting to leave and move away. And for Ronnie and his mother, who we kind of set up as like second, third generation Valley, they feel left behind. They feel, they come from a socioeconomic place where the father's not around for reasons you find out in the film, but they feel like the kind of last man standing. So Ronnie feels like he has some ownership over the land there, and to see all these people that don't look like him really makes him angry. But the onion goes further back than that. It's really his own family he's angry about, and all the things that go on in his house. But the easiest thing for him to put a target on is everything outside of him, which is what you also see online. It's like the reason that all these people get so like they poison their brains into like going after certain causes online is because they're really upset about something else. There's a fear and a past experiences that they're really more upset about than some casual racism that they display online. So that's kind of why we left a lot of that in there. It's almost like it's a way for them to almost forget their problems, is to put your focus on a new target rather than look inward and find like the truth about why you're upset. So in doing the research about Southern California as well, and looking at a lot of the groups, even some of the groups that went to Charlottesville, there was some hardcore, like basically Orange County UFC style, like far right kind of neo-Nazi-ish groups that were flying out to Charlottesville, and really the ones doing all that punching and kicking you see in all those videos. So there's definitely a dark side to Southern California, especially I think once you go below the airport, kind of Long Beach and down, there is a different mindset, and a very it's a very, very right sort of place. It's got a strong military background, but also kind of white, blue collar, and all that sort of thing around it sort of creates this offshoot of anger and of kind of blame. So it was interesting for us. It was fun to dive into those and find those nuggets to really push, and to have Ronnie go seek out that group in real life, and sort of leaders of that group that play out in the film. That all is kind of how it goes down in real life, so yeah, that's sort of in a nutshell, a long nutshell, sort of that Southern California sort of research that we did.
Dude, I grew up there in Joe, did you live in Southern California at any
in
point?
LA for quite a long time. So where I met Rob, we did a lot of stuff out there. I was in sort of the valley as well. So just sort of at the top of like where it dips down in North Hollywood, but enough. I did tutoring out there. I actually used to do tutoring for the school districts, and I would go out. You'd go miles and miles and miles down the 101 into some of these communities, and
So fun.
really far out. And yes, I mean, 20 hours, in fact. But there's a lot of as you say, LA spreads out in so many different directions. There's so many different microcosms of community, whether it's Koreatown, or it's the Latino communities, or whether they are, as you say, these like enclaves of like third generation blue collar white communities. So there's quite a lot going on in that area that a lot of people wouldn't maybe necessarily know about.
Yeah, it's really an amazing thing. There's a lot of things so I grew up in Orange County. There's a lot of things that I miss about it, and there's a ton of things that I dislike about it. Just
so what I'm talking about.
Absolutely, dude.
Yeah.
So totally. So I grew up next to El Toro Marine Base. I went to school with a lot of those kids. That added a difference, and I'm actually really grateful for it, because the general yuppies that I grew up around, like, it balanced it out big time. It gave some reality. You got to see firsthand, a war happen, especially the first Desert Storm War. And what's interesting is you're talking about the fights between the Antifa people. So in 2003, I actually was a photographer. Well, I was independent, but I did a lot of stuff for KPFK, which is like this. You couldn't even call it left. Maybe you call it like a leftist station in Southern California. And at the time, it was like, very anti-war. And it's so interesting to see that switch. And this is what, like, for me politically, I tend to, I think people get blindsided by a lot of stuff, and especially working within that circle, because it was like, okay, the government's lying, all this anti-war stuff. But then you saw these people be so narcissistic and ridiculous, and you would see them not go for what was the right moral choice that they wanted to do, and do what would be more popular. And you just saw that on both sides. And then it was like, then my answer was like, all right. So it's so funny, because everybody goes through these phases of being lost. And like I said, I told you guys before we recorded, it was like, I wanted to do filmmaking, and I was from California, but I was living in Hawaii. I was working with all these directors and getting like real good, like what would you call them? Like resumes basically from them, and, great directors, referencing me for stuff. Moved back, 9/11 happens. And I didn't really find my place, in that frustration. And so I just went into the punk rock movement, and it was like, all right, drugs, music, touring. I believe in nothing. I'm going to steal stuff. I'm going to have zero responsibility. And you build kind of a life out of that, which eventually, hopefully, you can repair. But so I went in that direction. That's actually how I ended up in Texas. That being said, like, the California, there's a lot to dislike about it. But when you get into that area in between, Orange County and LA, like south of the airport, there's a lot being aggrandized too. So if you're a white dude living in Long Beach, you have a very different, like, what do you have to look up to? There's a lot to be pissed off about. There's a lot that you see about, back when I was growing up, there was like gang culture, and Dr. Dre came out. It's going to date myself, but back then Sublime, Bradley Noel was alive, and they used to play everywhere. It was like the coolest band, right? Yeah. Them and No Doubt. They weren't like mega stars at all. Like Sublime got popular afterwards. But, it was like, what would you do if you were a white kid in that area? You'd go to you go do this and that, but there was all this other stuff happening from these different groups. And then what's so beautiful about Southern California, I'm talking way too much, is if you come to Texas, there's a huge Mexican presence, which is great. But in Southern California, it's really awesome because it integrates. Some people would hate to say that, but that's a distinct difference. You come to Texas, there's a massive Hispanic Mexican population, and it's separate. Whereas in Southern California, you can integrate. I actually spoke really better Spanish when I lived in Southern California than I did here. So it's kind of an interesting thing, but there's a lot to dislike, and there's all this tension, and it creates all these amazing subcultures. I was just impressed with your guys' stuff.
Yeah, no, I mean, I totally know what you mean. The two cultures blending. There is, the further, especially Inland Empire and a lot of those kind of Eastern areas. It's almost like white guys sound more Hispanic. A lot of them do anyway. And it's just an interesting thing with those two cultures meshing. But
I'll say this: in the Valley, if you took the punk scene from Orange County, so I was in the punk scene after, like, I left California mainly. When you looked at the punk scene in like the Valley, much different, much more rough. Blue Collar. Actually, my friend's band from way back when, Blue Collar Special. It was all about like this really working class thing. And if you went to Fullerton, it kind of had that. If you went to Bakersfield, it was different. But the Valley really, and this is where it's like your character was like, oh man, this dude is those guys.
Yeah.
But the punk dudes took the opposite, political ideology that they got, I guess you could say, radicalized about. And so
sure. Yeah. I mean, I think for Ronnie physically, I don't think, like, because I've known like kind of guys you're talking about, I guess you'd call them like pretty hard kind of woods from the Valley who would be very different than our character, guys who kind of took up more of a kind of a physical or a violent streak. Whereas Ronnie, he comes from a whole different place than I think a lot of probably the punk rock scene that you're talking about in the Valley, that I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I used to know a guy who grew up in Van Nuys, this white dude, and he was like one of the hardest guys I ever met. And he basically it all came down to being from Van Nuys and being a white guy, because he just basically had to fight his way out of Van Nuys. Yeah. So our character is different, and it's more of a sheltered thing with his mother, and probably a lot, in working with Zach, our actor, and talking about kind of where he came from. He was the opposite probably of that type of person.
But okay, so the mother, this is really interesting, because when you get into, so once again, when I saw this phenomenon happen, I couldn't relate with it, because not that it was any better. Like, people talk about all this alpha stuff, like that's how you die, man. That's how you get hurt. If you're really doing that, like, I think you should learn confidence and all these things. But when you're a weak man and you look at what a strong man's supposed to be like, you build up this fantasy model, and which your film is kind of pointing out. So I did get in fights. I wasn't tough by any means. It was like, it was like rough.
I've seen your videos. You look pretty tough. I've seen your UFC.
I get my ass kicked all the time, man. So I'm 42, man, and I can't do it. Like, it's so crappy, man. Oh, I hate it. But you get old, it changes. So if I had this stuff when I was in my 20s, like, I'd probably actually be really injured right now. I'm only just mildly injured. So anyway, but then there's this whole like culture of men that haven't done that, and that and I think they always existed, but now there's more of a voice, and the internet really speaks to it. And I'm not hating on it by any means. Like, these guys got to have an outlet to talk that I think is healthy. But your character is like a lot, and man, I can't tell you how many people I know throughout the South, because I've been coaching men since 2006. I know through the South, I know through all the United States. And there's a lack of a father figure. There's a mom who's burnt out. There's a mom who was at one point an awesome mom, and she's probably still an awesome mom in so many ways. There's a mom who's never been a good mom, who went for independence. And it's the craziest culture. All right. There's a guy, he may not have his dad around. He's angry about that. He may like his father now, but he's angry that his father was gone. He felt his mom lied to him about women in her fight for independence. He doesn't have like whatever support. He got made fun of. All this stuff gets accentuated and it's totally frustrated. What's interesting about your film is with his mom, and again, don't want to give away too much, man, it just sets it all up. And actually, I want to ask you this because either you or somebody promoting your film said the real mental illness film of 2019 is not The Joker, it's Cuck. I would actually say, I mean, your character could be mentally ill, or he probably is, but there's so much environmentally that shapes a person like that, of what happened to him. And that's how he would end up.
Yeah.
In just that stagnant, dead, dark, fucking poor, not making anything. You have no answers. I thought that was really interesting. How did you know that this person existed? I had to look.
Yeah, Joe, you want to take this one?
Well, there's a lot, first of all, I mean, in terms of research that's important. I mean, we really saw a lot of patterns emerging in some of these extreme cases. I mean, we want to say, Ronnie represents a lot of different people, but the outcome is actually not. I mean, if you look at the film, the climax of the film is a rarity. I mean, the fact that Ronnie actually snaps and kills someone is not what we're saying about people who grow up in these environments. But there are, I mean, the people that did, some of the more high-profile shooters, and I won't name them names because I don't glorify them naming their names, but when we were doing the research process, almost every one of these mass attackers, if you go back and you look, you see childhood history of, unstable family, maybe had a bad relationship with the mother, felt, unheard, was either bullied at school or just didn't fit in some way. So there were a lot of aspects, this powder keg of factors that cause a person who's, not mentally ill from a chemical sense, but someone whose environment is just constantly pressing from a lot of different angles. That's absolutely something that would create that. And, I had growing up, I had a friend his mother was mentally ill, and she was, I don't know what her diagnosis was, but she was very, very unstable. And this friend suffered from a lot of anxiety. He walked on eggshells. He didn't know who she was going to be one way or the other. So it's sort of like this idea of the home, which is supposed to foster and bring up this ideal of, growing and discovering yourself, becomes like this, dank, moldy cage that, the person festers in. And we wanted every aspect of the environment. I mean, of his neighborhood, his mother, the aspirational view, the way he views his father, and the father's military jacket and what that means to him in the absence of an actual father he can talk to. All of these things were very deliberate choices that we wanted to layer in, subtly.
Yeah, no, I'll piggyback on that. I think with Ronnie and putting his father on a pedestal, and the father not being there, the way I always viewed, and the way I talked to the actors about Ronnie and mother Sally Kirkland and Zach, was it's more of a I'm forgetting the actual term, but it's kind of when a mother and a son, or a parents kind of more become like almost like a couple or siblings.
Yeah. It's very common.
Yeah, it's common. They get so enmeshed. It's almost like a tail chasing each other, and they're pushing each other's buttons. And yes, there's mental illness maybe in the house, but nobody's sure from where. And because of their socioeconomic background, they're not going to psychologists and trying to figure out what's wrong with Ronnie, or mother's certainly not trying to figure out what's wrong with her. She's watching
religious stuff,
religious, like
watching screens. They're doing the same thing. They're both watching screens to get each other away from the actual connection that they could have as human beings.
Right. Yeah. They both have their outlets, and using kind of the father is that pedestal for us. You know, it's also this matter of stolen valor that we see come up time and time again. And it's been interesting talking, you know, a group that's actually, you know, some of the biggest fans of this film are military vets who have said, man, I know these guys, especially the guys now down near Pendleton and all that, who have seen this stolen valor thing taken on by guys who have not been in the military, but have just been obsessed with it, being like an Army Ranger or whatever it is. And I've known people like that in high school who they're in the ROTC, and you kind of know that there's not really a career path for them there, just because you're in class with them and you kind of see them up close. And it's really not to their personality trait, but they so strongly want to. In some ways, that represents being like a man too, being an Army guy and being a vet. And in some ways, that's taken the place of finding like a true outlet. So we really found that stolen valor thing, it goes all the way down. Like there was a couple guys like, the Charlottesville guy, like the guy that ran his car into that crowd. Basically, we had this script written, but when that guy's profile came out, we looked and we said, holy cow, that's Ronnie. I mean, the mother, the stolen valor, the kind of the hours he spent online, the heroes he thinks he found, who were all these like kind of guys you see with the tiki torches in the videos later. He went down to meet them and be a hero, and he got so snooked. You know, he went and did something he thought he was going to get lauded for and applauded for. And those guys ran faster than you can imagine away from that. I don't know if you remember that event, but all those guys that were talking tough, all of a sudden were running from that guy. And basically he had thought he found his people when really, that wasn't the case at all. He was chasing something that wasn't there.
God, man, that's so, it's so true, man. I have an opinion about this, but you kind of touched on it, Joe. Both of you guys answered. I remember when American Beauty came out, and at the end, the Marine kills Kevin Spacey. And, I remember I had this one friend who was in Orange County. He was like, 20 or so, and he's like super libertarian. And he goes, and all of us were like talking about the movie and how great it was and all this sort of stuff. And he was like, dude, that movie's bullshit, because it just says that, every Marine's some repressed homosexual that's going to kill somebody.
Yeah.
And so, Joe, you kind of touched on this, like our movie's not saying that a guy's going to kill somebody who's into this stuff, but it is pointing out a chain of things. And I think it's not dependent upon the political ideology. It's the characterization of like that type of childhood, that type of mother, that type of online obsession, that type of buying into heroes that you may not know, and then they bail from you type thing. What do you say to people who, because I'm sure a ton of guys tell you that, like, oh, the red pill's killing me, or oh, computer gamers, that sort of thing.
It's wild. I'll just quickly touch. I mean, what I found most interesting about that is when we made the film, you kind of understand, oh, there's definitely going to be some flack for this, because we're making a movie about an isolated young guy online 8 to 10 hours a day, and really that's who those people are, the loudest people online. If they're mad about something, you certainly know about it. But what I kind of didn't really factor in was just how many people were going to almost cape up or align themselves with Ronnie in some way. Like you said, like saying like, oh, this is saying that all of us are like this. I mean, I get so confused by that, because if I'm part of these groups or online a lot, and I'm a smart, funny guy doing podcasts or whatever, but I have a take on something, I don't think, oh, this movie Cuck, oh man, this is about me. This guy Ronnie, man, they're coming after me. I mean, there's definitely, through the research we've done and the people we've looked at, there is a percentage of people like Ronnie in these groups. I mean, all you have to do is look in the news and look at the manifestos and the different things you see and trail back to the Chans and all that. but we're absolutely not saying like all of you people are Ronnie. And that's been the most interesting thing, and that I think I sort of wasn't quite prepared for. We've seen, I call them anti-fans. To say troll feels kind of outdated, but maybe anti-fans is a better word. But I've seen it kind of break into different groups. It's almost like, at first when, I'll just kind of go back in history a little bit, like, just to give you some timelines. We wrote this in 2017. We came up with the idea end of 2016. We shot it. We fundraised. We put it on Blacklist. We cast it, and then we shot it February 2018. And then in 3 months, we had a cut. We're going out. We were trying to find finishing funds. We were trying to find color. We were trying to finish sound. There was a lot we didn't have money for. So we sent that movie out all over the place the summer of 2018. And this is 3 months before the Joker shot one day of their movie. And I'm coming back around to this because we've somehow been aligned with the Joker film in a way that we never saw coming. I mean, our film was out there, written and edited before it was even a speck in our eye that it was even a film. So what's been interesting about what's happened is, at first we thought, okay, the alt-right guys, they're going to be really mad about our movie. And it turns out when they saw the film, I think a lot of them said, oh, this isn't really American History X. This is more like just about a lonely guy, like almost like Happiness or something. Like, this is like a sad sack guy that we're not,
Did you just reference the Todd Solondz movie Happiness?
Yes,
yeah,
I did. Of course we did.
Yeah.
How can you make a movie like that? Now, where were all the pedophiles saying that? Really, I feel marginalized.
Hey, they took that movie out of print, man. I'm just saying.
Did they?
Well,
Yeah, I have a DVD of it now. You can't get it streaming anywhere,
Wow. But just to
Great
finish
film.
that point real quick, just, and then there was a couple other groups that we saw that I think surprised us as well. And, the incel and men's groups guys, I think some of them, because we talked to some of these guys while we were writing and in production, and they at first were very upset because we were doing like pre-marketing for the film, like kind of like for almost like for investors too. So we had like these guys reaching out like, hey, what is this? What are you doing? What are you assholes doing? And so I just, quite frankly, I got on there and I said, hey, this is what we're doing. Would you like to talk about it? And a couple of the guys said, look, you can do this movie. If you do this movie, fine. But if you don't nail down the loneliness, then you're just making fun of us. You're purely making fun of us. So that was almost a shift too for us to really hug the fly on the wall aspect of being with Ronnie as much as we are, seeing what he's doing in his room, whether you like it or not. We're there with Ronnie. So you feel the loneliness drip off Ronnie. So that group has been kind of like, yeah, they're upset, but sort of in a way they're like, yeah, but it's not like inaccurate. But the two groups that really are shocking to us are gamers and Joker fanatics. And those are almost the two loudest groups, and two of the groups that we didn't, when we were writing it, shooting it, weren't thinking about at all. So I'm not exactly sure where that comes from. The Joker thing, I think, comes from some reviews that paired us up against like the Joker during our release. But we in no way were trying to do anything that was related to the Joker, even knew about the Joker. In fact, if anything, it was both I guess a blessing and a curse. At first when I heard they were opening, I'm like, what is this? Like coming out the same day as us. And but it did raise a lot of noise for us, but it still is confusing to me. Most of the user reviews that you see, people like we're getting a fair amount of review bombing. It's sort of I think a thing that's come around in the last 5 or 8 years of groups, especially this group, getting upset about a film or whatever, and then they go and they review bomb. So they downrate and they write user reviews. And if you get on and look at the user reviews, 9 times out of 10, this is either their first or their second review. And every single time you look, they've done, okay, they kill our film. all this stuff, liberal, fantasy world. And then you look, oh, what else have they reviewed? Oh, The Joker. They gave it 10 stars, and it's like this glowing review. And it keeps coming up time and time again. And I mean, it's still happening today where we're getting like people sending us like this latest thing they've latched onto is like Joker box office versus our box office. And our distributor just never released the box office numbers, never put out, kind of what happened those 2 weeks. We had a little 2-week run and people went to the theater, but it was really about the VOD. We had a day and date release, and really the theatrical for a little film is really marketing and window dressing for the VOD. But now, online there was some not available data about our box office. So all these people have ran with this idea that we made zero at the box office is like a getcha kind of thing.
Cuck did not make one single dollar. Not one person bought a ticket.
So it's been really funny. But what's happened though, what's interesting, and I think they're unwittingly kind of doing this, is like a little film like ours that has really no marketing money to speak of. We are missing that piece to our film. And what they've done is they've taken up the mantle for creating noise for the movie. And so in some ways they're unwittingly pushing revenue and eyes towards our film by talking about it so much. And I guess they can make fun of it all they want as long as they're keep talking about it. It's love me or hate me, but don't ignore me. So.
Yeah. It's such a weird thing. If there was some like marketing master, which is you guys are probably too attached to it, I wouldn't be able to tell. But like they could use that to, what was that? The Tropa Jelic, the Brazilian film, which now that director's like great, but he made a documentary film before, but apparently the movie was cut totally different, and then they released an edit. The guy who is the star of that movie, the Elite Squad, which is this popular movie.
Okay.
So the guy that's the star wasn't the star. He actually gets killed off in the movie, but they re-edited it and the editor saved it. So they leaked out a copy, and then the people loved it so much that it was leaked out that they saw it in the theaters and became famous. But it was like this marketing ploy. The funny thing is the movie that the director made before, now he's like this major Netflix director and did Narcos and all this shit. But the movie he did before was a freaking documentary that didn't do much. That was like 5 or 6 years before, Tropa Jelic came out or whatever. And like, it's so funny that just how like those things happen. It would be great if you could like mastermind them. But dude, okay, between the Joker and your movie, I don't see the connection. And the biggest connection is the color. Like they're the same green tone. They have that same feel. But I would even say like the Joker. So in some ways, I mean, look, the Joker I thought was a good movie. And I don't think you should compare them.
Sure.
It's not a point to, but like it's trying to accomplish something totally different. And it's a major motion picture. Right. You guys had limited release. I couldn't even see it in Texas. If I could have seen it, and I was looking, I didn't know where to go. But in some ways, it's shot differently. I mean, the Joker's so fucking stylized and how it's shot that I don't know. And they're both about a crazy person.
Right.
What I thought was what's interesting about your film, and this I think should be distinguished, but probably nobody cares. The Joker, it was literally saying he was crazy. Went to a social worker. They were talking about his mental illness, not taking medication, and the crazy over-the-top results from that are unbelievable. Him going on some show and executing somebody, and then the world rioting, backing him, and all the glory. The fantasy.
Right.
Your guys' film is about a real person who might do something. Who has real problems, that his problem is his fantasy and the reality of like, fuck, I'm being rejected by the world. Dude, like, and all that shit, like, dude, I don't want to ruin, Joe already threw out a little bit of the ending, but I don't want to ruin it, but like he goes on that date or he talks to the girl with the headphones on in the beginning and man, that sucks.
Yeah.
You know, he was trying. And he was trying, and it shows the good nature of him. And he's got all this hate inside of him, but he tried. And he tried. He said pussy.
Right.
And, you know, and then the girl gets mad at him, and he's trying. And he doesn't know. And he's really sad, and he can't fight back.
Well,
like
he is a lonely guy who's trying. I mean, that's he's not just a nihilistic guy from minute one. He's a guy who's actually trying to put it together, but, and maybe Joe can speak a little bit more to this too, but he also is unwittingly getting in his own way all the way along. And
yeah.
One thing that I think is interesting, especially in the comparison to Joker, is that ultimately when you walk into Joker, you sort of know, I mean, there's a certain plot armor surrounding the character. You know, he can get beaten up and he can have bad things happen to him, but there isn't the same level of vulnerability because ultimately you know who he is. He becomes the Joker, and everything else that's canon in the DC Comics universe is going to happen. So with our character, you know, there is no plot armor. The slow progression of his emotional state and his feelings of both, you know, despair, grandeur, you know, fantasy and tragedy, like all of that is real. As he's getting, you know, things slowly, you know, beaten off of him, basically, you know, and not in the way that happens in the film, but I mean, he's slowly getting eroded, you know, his spirit. You know, these are things that actually you feel with the character, and you realize that like nothing is going to scoop him out from the end. It's all his decisions. You know, he's in control, not, you know, some steps of fate.
Guys, do you want to talk, because you had mentioned over email, like some of the trolling and stuff like that. You mentioned the gamers and the Joker comparison people. What is that all about? Because I get people trolling you or hating on you. But what is particular about this or super surprising?
Well, I'll speak to that just to open things up. I think that the trolling actually started with the Instagram campaign. It was before the Red Band trailer came out, but we were posting, you know, maybe 2 updates a week on our Instagram. And we had, I think one of the earliest things we posted was a video clip, but it was one of the vlogs. And so it's a grainy, you know, webcam clip, and it's, you know, about a minute or so of Zach Sherman, you know, going through one of his monologues. And he talks about, you know, frustration, and there's a little bit of racism and sexism built in there. And, you know, we sort of had just taglines, you know, cuck, you know, incel, whatever. And a lot of people, the first wave of anger was from people on the left who thought that we were Ronnie, or we were actually taking up the mantle of Ronnie. Some people thought it was a documentary. They thought that either Ronnie has the channel, although his life is not particularly Instagrammable, but they thought that we were either, you know, we were uplifting the message of Ronnie. And so we sort of had to change our strategy. We adopted the hashtag Lost Boys, and we started coining this idea that, okay, these are what Lost Boys feel and what Lost Boys experience and what Lost Boys do, which then was construed to mean that we think that anybody who's sad becomes, you know, an extremist, which was not what we're saying. But from that point, we started getting a lot of attention from people that thought that, again, the film was making fun of them. Or that if the film was satirical, which in many ways it is, it's not a satire against this one sad person. It's a satire of a world that a person has to navigate to, you know, unpleasant results, if that makes sense. So from the very beginning, it was about an interpretation thing. What I find really challenging about this, and it's sort of suggesting that as a filmmaker, you have to either 100% uphold the values of your protagonist. Your protagonist represents your views and values, or you have to fully reject your protagonist's views and values, which again is a box that no filmmaker should ever have to be put in. You know, this is a film about gray areas. This is a film about, you know, showing in uncomfortable closeness and intimacy a character that we may have empathy for, but not sympathy. We can understand him even if we don't like what he does. And so this feeling that whatever we show in either a clip or even the whole movie is like, well, that's it. You know, we're 100% one way or 100% the other way is really just an impossible standard for a filmmaker to live up to.
Yeah, I mean, to piggyback on that, I mean, some of the films that we really liked, I'm a huge Abel Ferrara fan. I mean, that's sort of like my, you know, what if I'm ever in a pinch, what would Abel do? But you know, a film like Bad Lieutenant, if that came out today, can you imagine the outrage about, are you saying that all cops are you know, disgusting, like drug addicted, degenerate gamblers? I mean, it would be viewed in such a different way. Buffalo 66, are you saying that all, you know, ex-convicts are turned out like and don't, you know,
Are you a Vincent Gallo fan? Like, because he has a wide.
Yeah, you know what? I really like Buffalo 66. You know, some of the other stuff I you know, I think is all right. But Brown Bunny, I'm a fan of Buffalo 66. I'll say that. I mean, but I just find like that character study where he went with that, and sort of where Abel Ferrara went with Bad Lieutenant, where you can kind of see everything. You let everything hang out. And I was saying this in another little interview like a month or so ago. You know, part of the problem is today is you don't see those kind of films anymore. And I think that's why there was so much shock about Cuck. Like, oh, there's all this sex. And really, if you break it down, like, there's no full frontal. There's no, like, there is a lot of sex, but like we're placing the camera in certain places, and we want you to feel like we're really shooting a dirty valley porno in spots.
And it was stylized. It was surreal. All the sex stuff. I didn't really study it, but I just remember when I was watching it, it was very, you know, it was showing time pass and character development and stuff like that. And then the most real sex was different, you know. So but you bring back different things about filmmaking, you know, with Bad Lieutenant or even Buffalo 66. It's these great directorial choices and writings, because especially with Buffalo 66, there was humor in it. There was a style that was also funny, that made it funny. And then just a really hard, bizarre, you know, character and taking chances. And so you're right. You don't see movies that are taking those chances.
People are too afraid. Studios are too afraid. Production companies are too afraid now to make those films. And, you know, that goes back to, you know, we got flack from all sides about this film. You know, it was, you know, not, you know, because we're still playing the game and trying to get films made. I don't want to talk too out of school, but like festivals would contact us about it, and just, you know, I feel like this film in 1998 would have been like seen in a whole different way, you know, or 2004 or even 2010. But there's really, the climate for really letting it hang out there is not there anymore. Unless it's a foreign film. If you're like a Spanish filmmaker, you can kind of go for it. American filmmakers, I don't think, have the green light to do a Bad Lieutenant or Buffalo 66 in the same way they used to. And we saw that with Cuck.
So the movie doesn't look low budget to me. It might in terms of the cast, like what I mean is the amount of actors. The amount of actors. So the actors did a really good job, but there's just not a huge amount of them. And every single one of them, like all the way down to the girl who has the problem with, you know, saying the word pussy. Like this is like good stuff, you know, that all these people did in it. Like how, and I don't mean numbers, but how low budget are we talking? Like how much?
Yeah. So we were at one time in talks to possibly get a Cassavetes nomination, which is an independent spirit, and you have to be below 500K. We didn't end up joining that fun circle, but we were sub 500K.
Yeah.
So less than $500,000.
And what does that mean to people? Because people are like, I could buy a house with that. But like what?
I mean, in terms of movie making, you know, independent film is a kind of a loose term today. There's a A24 independent films, which are $8 to $12 million. And then there's micro budget real independent film, which is a movie like ours. And at one time we were looking to do this movie for like 75K. And I had this idea that Ronnie was going to be an actor, and everybody else around him was going to be real people. Like we were going to do almost like a early Safdie brothers kind of film. You know, the Safdie brothers, their early movies are great. They usually like have one or two like real actors, and then just cast real people. They still cast real people. It's really cool what they're doing. But we were going to do something like that, and then sort of it would be even more kind of doc style, shaky cam, following a guy, almost like a documentary. But as we started fundraising, we found more and more people that were interested in seeing this get a better budget. And we, as producers came on, we saw, potential to make it for more. But one time we had two really big actors reading it, two very big names. And basically it came down to asking me if I would step aside, if I'd be willing to step aside, just be a writer on it. And ultimately, Joe and I talked about it, and this is something we wanted to use as our breakout film, our first film, as a writing team, and for me directing. So, we just kind of turned that down. There would have been a little bit more money, but it would have been, to me, Zach Sherman. I'll talk a little bit about Zach. He went from playing like heartthrobby, blue-eyed guy on Beverly Hills 90210, the reboot, to gaining 45 pounds to play Ronnie, and just losing himself in the role, and driving the van home on shoot days, and like living Ronnie. And he wasn't a psycho like method actor, but he was very much in character almost at all times. But you could have a conversation with him and talk about motivations and that kind of thing. But
yeah,
I think the one thing I'll say, and I know Joker is a wonderful film, and Joaquin is an amazing actor, and it'd be honestly a dream to work with somebody like him. I've been a fan since like Clay Pigeon and Gladiator and all that. He's amazing. But what Joe kind of touched on earlier, there's sort of a built-in world there, a fantasy world. And I think what Zach did, which is equally, if not more impressive, is playing somebody who's really walking around today and making it believable. I mean, as many people that have taken a crack at our film and said this, that, or the other, 95% of them always talk about how great Zach is. And because he's absolutely owns the character, there's no winking to the camera. As much as, there are satirical moments, and Zach and I talked about that with Joe, there was never a moment where Zach is winking at the camera, letting you know that, he plays it totally real. And I think that's what sells the scene work and the acting and even some of the satire, is that he just plays it straight. And I think ultimately without Zach, the movie we're not probably having this conversation,
He was amazing. And you guys talking about other people coming on or whatever that situation is, the movie. So I wasn't expecting like a movie to be as good as it was. And that's not like, I didn't know you guys, and you just see, this is a movie about like some, cultural phenomenon that's happening now. It had to be rushed.
Right.
It could be about anything. I got it when I saw the promotion of kind of what it was going to be about. But then it was like, wow, this guy is really this. And again, I'd even say like the pacing, how the characters come in was really smart. But dude, that guy did a great job. Yeah. Everybody. I mean, like, man, the people who, had the racism and porn thing going on. I mean, there's because that's so in the Valley.
Oh yeah, well, those are real people that I mean, those are actors, but those characters are real people that I knew about 10 or 15 years ago. I actually used to talk about like some wild times in your youth. There was this bar I used to go to called La Canyon in Woodland Hills, and it's sort of like a really seedy sort of bar, at least at that time. And it was a place, it was in this strip mall on Ventura and Topanga, and you would get porn stars, escorts, bikers, you get all kinds of people there. And so I would go in there. I was working construction at the time, and I would go in there, and it was just a fun people watching as a filmmaker and storyteller, and at least something that in my future I wanted to do. I took the time to go in there and hang out. And I got to know basically the couple is a combination of four people. There was a couple that was an actual porn couple, very famous porn stars who used to hang out at this bar, and they used to hang out late night and then take dudes home and do video and all kinds of things. I wasn't a part of that, but I heard about it. And then there was a couple it was a biker couple where this biker basically was his wife was an escort and he was the pimp, and it was very much a business relationship. And so I took those four people and kind of crammed them into two, and it was interesting to see Tim Murphy and Monique Parent pull that off, because they nailed it.
Great.
Tim's Sons of Anarchy, and he's a pro. And Monique Parent, like a lot of people love Zach's performance, but across the board, people also talk about Monique and what she did with Candy, and Sally Kirkland too, who plays the mother, who's up for an Oscar and won a Golden Globe, and she got down with our dirty little crew and played mother, and she was all game for it. She's amazing in it too. So I was lucky with that foursome really kind of coming together for sure.
Yeah, you guys pulled off like some good stuff, man. I want to ask you guys this before I ask you what is next on the horizon, which you probably can't talk about too much. But what's the solution? This movie kicked up a bunch of dust, some stuff that was unexpected. There's lonely young men out there. There's whatever. There's politicized craziness shit. What do you say to people who are having problems like this? What would you say to a Ronnie?
I think one of the main issues we sort of want to touch on, with the film and beyond, is the idea of, getting your voice heard. In a supportive format where you're not going to be judged, but you're also not going to be overly validated for having opinions that, lead you down a dark path. So, one of the earliest conversations in Cuck is when he's talking to his PO. The PO says, I hear you loud and clear, Ronnie, but it's like he's not listening to Ronnie at all. And Ronnie's frustration is very clear that, throughout whatever their relationship has been in the past, this PO hasn't listened to Ronnie. The character of Larry, that we really want to develop is sort of a side character, someone that Ronnie is drawn to him like a moth to a flame, because he's a male role model. He's somebody that will take Ronnie seriously to a certain extent, but his advice doesn't apply to Ronnie's situation. This guy is a, tall, muscular, former, Marine Corps kind of guy. And he's giving advice that could be helpful, but again, it doesn't fit Ronnie's world, and Ronnie's applying it in the wrong ways. Right after that conversation about being tough and you got to assert yourself and you got to do that, he goes on the date and he's not being himself. He's being totally fake. And the reason why he screws over the date is not because of who he is. It's because of this projection and this armor that he puts on that the girl finds so off-putting, and it ruins. But again, when the date blows up in his face, rather than thinking, oh, that was a bad idea, it's a feeling of internal wounding. So there's this idea of creating these dialogues. You want to be able to, and maybe a lot of it is something that you do. I mean, you work with a lot of young men of different ages, and I've also mentored young men. I sort of experience a lot of this. You see, across the board generationally, maybe more this past couple generations than in the deeper past. But yeah, this is a conversation that should be happening. These are, you should be able to talk about your frustrations without being judged, because I know right now it's a very, popular thing that if somebody talks about frustration, they just shut them down. Like, oh, you're an incel, you're this, whatever. You want to be able to say that and feel like it's normalized before you can actually deal with your shit and figure out how to fix it. So I think, that's the first step that we need to get to, is, getting people's voices heard in a supportive, real environment.
Yeah.
I think, really putting a spotlight on kind of what's happening, especially with sort of the empty vessel young men who are getting attracted to this stuff online. I feel like in some ways, if there can be some self-reflection too about um, letting your mind kind of be poisoned. And what I mean by that is, and I've experienced it in ways where you let things fester and kind of take over, whether it's like an anger or fear about something else, and I'm projecting it. And the more I kind of run it through the cycle of the echo chamber and the group that I'm with, the more that sort of poison sets hold. And poison's a dramatic word, but the thinking sort of starts to overtake. And you in 12-step programs, they talk about, it's really a mindset shift and kind of getting rid of that old thinking that, if our mind is a warehouse that sends electrical signals all day long about a certain thing, if you don't stop that and you just encourage it, well, that's what your mindset's going to be. That's what you're going to start to project and think. And I think there's a lot that can be kind of culled from Ronnie, and seeing kind of him. You see his mind and his whole world start to sort of set into that poison as we go through it. It's a descent into madness, really, once you hit the halfway point. He starts off trying, and then some things take hold, and he's too far gone, and there's no stopping the train at that point. So,
man, I got to ask this other question. What do you think makes him insane? What does make him different from the other people involved in the things that he's aligned with?
Yeah, I think it's his background and his past that sort of allows him to go there. It's the idea that he can't find healthy outlets, like Joe is saying, and those aren't presented to him. They're not available to him. So what makes him different is maybe other people have maybe more means or kind of more education and are able to pull themselves out of that sort of poisonous thinking. Whereas Ronnie's, he's completely defenseless and vulnerable to it. And you kind of see that throughout. He's really just ping-ponging between emotions, and he's he's really a man without a life preserver, really just kind of winging it, and I think he's just wide open to this sort of this sort of recruitment and thing that happens online. What do you think, Joe? Yeah,
I think that it's a lot of it is just a desire to fit in. I mean, Ronnie wants very badly to be validated by someone because he's not getting the right validation from the right people. He discovers a world where people can glom onto his ideas and say, yes, you're right. Yes, you're right. And unfortunately, what that does is, he has to create a fantasy that's, his own life is still in shambles, but because of his channel and he's growing, and this is something that he feels truly a part of, which is natural and psychologically normal. One thing that we really loved, and this was a later addition, it wasn't in the original script, but the ending of revealing the lost tape on the beach and showing this sort of high point in Ronnie's psychology. I wanted to talk about that because we didn't want to end on the dark note of his death. We wanted this kind of like almost beyond the pale kind of statement.
God,
and, he records it. It's fucking haunting. Like, he records it.
It's fucked. It's not on the fucked level of, like, you watch the movie Irreversible, and the end, Monica Bellucci's like, I'm pregnant and this is so good. Yeah. And it's beautiful, and the music and the camera, the dollars, and it's like, but the end of Cuck is similar to that, where it's so fucked.
Yeah.
It's like, fuck, man.
Yeah.
Fuck.
God, well, it really shows that he wants what everybody wants. He wanted acceptance. He thought he really found true love. Now, as an audience member, you see kind of how off base all that thinking is. But, you really see, like, this guy really, he just was a lost guy. And Joe, did you have something to say about the last scene?
No, I think that's touching on it. I mean, he's at a high point. What he's saying, I mean, again, this is the element of satire. You're not really making fun of Ronnie, but it's a satire of, like, this is the high point. He feels like he's been accepted. He's found love. He's found a mentor. And the irony is, we know that none of that is true, but you're watching the earnest, acceptance that Ronnie truly believes that he's arriving at a level where, he's found something. He's wishing his followers, I hope good things happen to you too. And it's just sad because it's like you realize he's not a monster. He's capable of feeling certain very normal things. It's down such a warped path because he's had no other path to walk down his entire life. And so he's here.
Okay, so you didn't have a political agenda in this movie. You didn't have a say against like, red pill stuff or whatever. What then is the point of this movie? And there could be a lot of points: personal journey, first feature film, artistic expression. What is the point?
Kind of that's a very pointed question. I would say that a lot of it is being immersed into this journey of this character. You are in his space. It's uncomfortable. You are uncomfortable when you watch it. And the whole idea of the film, for people both on the right and the left, I mean, it's an uncomfortable film to acknowledge. And one thing we really wanted to do is like get you into the psyche of someone that maybe you don't even particularly like, but you can understand. I was actually really surprised. I've had women, very liberal, feminist women say, I watched the movie and I understood him. I got him. Like I realized why he felt that way, and I felt bad for him. I thought, well, like, okay, if we can sort of bridge that kind of gap, if we can open up a conversation and say, look, this is a character who does and says and thinks some pretty horrible things, but at the end of the day, he's not coming from a place of, pure evil. He's coming from a place of woundedness, vulnerability, confusion, not having other options. We want to do, if you can at least buy Ronnie as a real person, then we did our job.
Yeah, I think for me, the film, the purpose is it's a time capsule of a very specific individual between 2015 and really 2020. I was thinking about it recently, when we were writing it and looking at a lot of these characters, there was these, shootings 2 or 3 times a month, and it was sort of fueling the writing, and we were sort of matching, like it was very of the moment. And I feel like in the last year or two, a lot of that has quieted, and I'm not sure the reasons why. But when I think about this film, it feels very 2016 to 2018, if you know what I'm saying. It's sort of
very.
It's like it was just a few years ago, like 2 or 3, but it feels like 10 years ago in a strange way. Maybe just because we've been working on the movie. But I think for me, I would like it to kind of stand as a time capsule and be like, this was a thing that was happening. These rallies where people would dress up in cardboard armor and fight each other in Portland and Berkeley. And, it may keep continuing, but from what I'm seeing, it's sort of starting to shift. And a lot of like the Chance Dalmain character in the movie, he's based on, 5 or 10 charismatic sort of YouTube heads. I'm sure different guys that we're looking at there.
Oh, it's great.
But what's interesting is the guys we were looking at, all those guys are gone now. Yeah. Like for the most part. And that was only 3 or 4 years ago.
And those people had huge followings.
It's
crazy. Yeah. It's nuts.
And so now there's new people. I no longer research things related to Cuck, so I don't know their names. But there are certainly new people who do hit pieces on our film still. But I don't learn who they are or know too much about them. But it's really interesting. I even think like a lot of the terminology in the film is a time capsule because you see a lot of the lingo in there that I think has shifted in the last year or two. So
man, great job on the movie. If anything, it meant a lot for me to see it in what you're saying with the time and totally a little time capsule of the era and so true to how somebody like that thinks. And I really enjoyed talking to you guys about that it doesn't have a political thing and that it really is about, this theme that reoccurs throughout time, but in our time it comes out in this way and it's really heightened. It's very beautiful. You guys still working together on stuff?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, we got a couple things. I mean, it's been interesting. We've, you know, a lot of people want to know what the next thing is. So we've had meetings. This coronavirus thing has sort of frozen everything in place. So we're as, you know, kind of like in waiting like everyone. But, you know, depends on how quickly like production for the big folks gets going, because then, you know, all us plebes, it sort of flows down from there. But yeah, we have a couple projects going. It's interesting, like we're doing a couple other, we have a couple other scripts that have character studies built into genres, kind of more thriller or even psych horror. But I don't think we'll get the same troll reaction from these groups. One little hint, we're working on something about the crust punk culture and hopping trains and some of that. So,
Fuck.
Yeah,
that was my life at one time.
That was your life.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we'll probably have to talk to you about it.
Yeah.
But hopefully we don't get the same negative reaction from the crust punks that we got.
Well, you know, I'll tell you this: whatever you guys do, I'll be looking, and I hope I'm surprised, because if you know, if like, let's say whatever great director you know out there did the sequel that everybody wanted them to do, it probably would have been stupid. It was good that they did their own thing. So
yeah, no Cuck 2. No Cuck 2.
Man, great stuff. Thanks so much, guys, for talking. This is really cool. You know, I've been following it for a while, and it's just so good to like reach out and actually talk to you guys and talk about the origins of it. Really a special thing. And I'm a fan of film. And so to see filmmakers do this, you know, to make a feature film that in my opinion, I don't know what under $500,000 means or whatever, but I do know that it looked good, and that's cool. You know? So,
well, I enjoyed talking to you, and I appreciate you bringing us on, because in watching your videos as well, it seemed there's an alignment with what you're doing and with what we did with the film. And Joe and I were really looking forward to chatting with you, and because of your close association with a lot of what you work with and the people you work with. So thanks for having us on and asking us like the good questions, the hard stuff. So it was fun chatting.
Cool stuff, man.
Cool. Thanks, Steve.
All right. Hey, and thank you guys so much for all of that, man. I love doing these interviews, and a lot more are going to come out here on the channel quite a bit. I've shot a ton actually in person that just need to be edited and all this sort of crazy stuff. But if you did enjoy this, like, subscribe, do all that sort of stuff, support the channel. That is huge for me. Leave comments. Let me know that this line is alive and that you're listening to it. What's important to me is about my interaction with you, not my interaction with the numbers of people watching and that sort of stuff. It's my interaction with you. That's how I've built my business. That's who we are. That is our community, and that's how we work. It's a pretty amazing thing. All right. On that note, do all that sort of good stuff. Thanks for watching.